Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale, and man, I finally have Adam on the channel. You guys may know him as Zed. That was, when he was on the channel, geez, about a year and a half ago. Playing Trifecta is kind of how he made his name early on in the game. Since then, Adam's gone on to be one of the most prolific players in the history of Clash Royale. One of the few players to get #1 global 3 times, including last season, as you can see on his profile. He's going to be here on his other account as well, and we're going to be really getting down to some pro tips that are going to help you guys have success with really the best deck in the game right now, especially for challenges. Look at this, by the way, on the overlay right now, over 620 win challenges using this deck right here that we're going to be showing today. And more importantly than just showing and giving the deck guide like we normally do here on CWA, we're also going to be covering the 3 most difficult matchups and most popular matchups right now, and specifically what we're going to do, what tools we're going to use to implement to best combat those decks. We're going to get really into the small little niche little moves that you make during the match to give you guys success and hopefully prevail and come out on top. Now, this is just the first episode in a 2-part bait series, I guess I'm doing on CWA Mobile Gaming. I'll bring the next one in maybe 2 days from now, covering a larger variety of decks. Before we get into the guide for this deck, let me first show you the free-to-play version. You can see right now on the screen, this is going to be the version you're going to use if you don't have Princess. There are 2 other subs as well. We have Zap in for Log, and we also have Fireball in for Rocket. Of course, this would be a better variation to use on ladder if you don't have Princess or you don't have a high-level Rocket and or Log. So this would be a good free-to-play version. It's still a really solid deck. It's the deck that Adam uses on his free-to-play account as well. So who is Adam, guys? We'll give you a little bit of an intro there, but I'm so happy to have him on, man. He is he's just so good. He's one of my favorite players in the game. Such a nice guy. I was able to meet him over in LA quite a few times because he was a finalist. He made it all the way to Phase 4 after a little bit of a rocky start in Phase 3 in the round robin tournament. He actually prevailed. He picked up and had a full head of steam going into Phase 4, where he performed pretty well. Unfortunately, didn't get into the top 2, but hey, he beat out whatever, like hundreds of thousands in North America to make it as far as he did, and again finished first last season. He's a contracted Nova player. By the way, guys, sometimes in the comments people are like, what makes these guys pro, Ash? You always say pro all the time. And for me, I mean, everybody has their own definition of what a pro is in a mobile game, right? It sounds kind of silly at first, but for me, the definition is people who are contracted and who get a monthly salary for playing this game. So Adam's certainly one of those guys with Nova, and that's when I use the word pro, that's specifically what I mean. For example, the video I put out yesterday with Gendrago, I never used the word pro because he's a really good player, has a really awesome accomplishment, but I didn't use the word pro because he's not contracted. Just wanted to kind of clear that up with you guys. So let's get to this deck already. You can see the awesome gameplay in the background. I made sure to ask Adam to share replays, again on Angela Baby account, that I thought would cover as much of the meta as possible so you guys can get an idea of how to combat it. But let's get into the actual deck review now that I've blabbed on for about, I don't know, 5 minutes here or so. It feels like that at least. So first off, let's hop right into the offense to this deck. What's the overall offensive strategy and the overall defensive strategy when playing this bait deck? So offense, it's going to be all about chip damage and playing aggressively while you're outcycling your opponent and getting it to have a really keen awareness of where your opponent's counters are in this deck. So again, it's a chip deck. You're going to be doing a lot of chip damage against a lot of decks. You're going to be chipping away till you can get to that magic 493 number where the Rocket can take out their tower. Now, of course, against different decks, you're going to be implementing different strategy, but overall, it is a chip deck. It's a bait deck. and a chip deck. So you're going to be doing chip damage with your princess at the bridge with this deck, with your goblin barrel, and with a variety of other tactics that we will talk about moving forward. On defense, well, defense, it's very, very match dependent, Adam says. He said the most important thing, as we just discussed on offense, it's the same with this deck. It's a cerebral deck. I don't know why people say bait takes no skill. To be very good at bait decks, you need to be a very skilled player, especially at understanding how to keep track of the opponent's cycle, both defensively and offensively. You want to make sure you have the appropriate answers on defense once you understand what your opponent is playing. Again, more on that in just a little bit. A quick little digression about the skill level involved in bait, right? Is someone once told me, I'm a skier and I also have dabbled into snowboarding, and I kind of found it difficult to snowboard, to be honest with you guys. I am a bigger guy, so you know, that was challenging in its own right. I don't have the best balance in the world. But someone once told me, an instructor, when I was having difficulty snowboarding for the first time, they were like, skiing is different than snowboarding. Skiing is very easy to pick up and very difficult to master, and snowboarding is somewhat the opposite. It's much more difficult to just pick up and get started with, and then it's a little bit more easy to master, and you use the word master loosely. And that's kind of how I think of bait decks, and also beatdown decks, two decks that get a bad rap for being no skill decks. I think just because they're a little bit easier to get a hold of, to grasp what you're trying to do conceptually, it doesn't mean they're easy to take to that next level, to be #1 in the world, or to rattle off 20-win champion challenge after 20-win champion challenge. Okay, how about double elixir versus single elixir strategy? So basically, you're going to be playing the same way, Adam says, both during single elixir and double elixir with this deck. You're essentially trying to do the same thing. Bait out your opponent's spells, get chip damage, defend properly, and the only difference that he could pick up from single to double elixir would be not being afraid to using that princess at the bridge during double elixir time for that extra chip damage, especially if you need to get your opponent's tower into rocket range to take care of the match via that one rocket at the end. So that's really it for single elixir and double elixir. How about your best opening plays? Best opening plays, there's really two of them with this deck. It can be a princess in the back of your king tower, or it can be a naked goblin barrel, meaning that you're not going to combo it with anything crazy. If you go against a spell bait player and they open up with like a goblin gang at the bridge and then throw a goblin barrel right after that, you know they're not experienced, because you can get tremendous log value as a defender. That's a crazy 2 for 6 trade to open up a match if you have a log, or if your opponent has a log. So you don't want to do anything absolutely crazy like that. It's okay to throw a 3 elixir goblin barrel. Adam says that's great. It's kind of scouting out your opponent, seeing what they have to counter your goblin barrel. Other than that, though, you want to play it safe, guys. The princess, as you're going to see in just a moment here, is really going to be your most valuable card in this deck. One card that's going to be very key to protect once you have her on the arena. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Let's first talk about common mistakes with this deck. So, what are you thinking about when you play a match? And this is something that we talk about a lot on this channel. Where should your mind be? What are you doing cognitively during these matches? Are you just, playing cards, on a whim? Or are you actually thinking about something? And why are you making the plays that you make? These are all important things to think about with any deck that you're playing, especially with a bait deck, as you'll see with Adam here. Adam says that it's very, very important to keep track of your opponent's defensive counter, defensive spell to your goblin barrel. That's the first thing that you're going to want to take notice of, right? So you can bait out their log using a solo goblin barrel, or you can bait out their log using a princess, or of course using a goblin gang. Basically, it's a spell bait deck, so you want to find out what their best counters to your goblin barrel is. Sometimes it might not even be a log, for example. It might be bats, or it might be fire spirits, or something like that, or even a Skarmy, or so you just want to be aware of what they have. Against some decks, they're going to have a lot of counters for your goblin barrel, so you're going to have to find alternative ways to win the match. That's where the rocket comes into play. That's why the princess on the bridge comes into play. There's a lot of methods that you can use if they have a lot of goblin barrels defenses in their deck. So other than that, another common mistake is being afraid to cycle too aggressively. Let me repeat that. Being afraid to cycle too aggressively. That's interesting because normally when pros come on the channel, they usually say, you know what, Ash, you can't play too aggressively with this deck. You have to be more defensive minded. However, Adam, you know, one of the best bait players in the world, maybe the best bait player. By the way, he was previously Zed. I think I mentioned that, right? I did at the beginning of the video. A lot of my old school viewers might know him from Pro v Pro with Jordan way back in the day, but it's really cool. It's come full circle like this. Anyway, so not being afraid to play too aggressively. This is an aggressive deck. You can use offense to stop your opponent from doing what they want to do on their side offensively. So essentially, you're playing defense through your offense by keeping that fast tempo up. Just don't do stupid moves, right? Don't throw it like we talked about before. Don't send in the princess at the same time as the goblin barrel if you know they have log in rotation. Okay, just try to be smart about it, but don't be afraid to cycle aggressively with this deck. It's a bait deck, it's a chip deck. That means it's inherently an aggressive deck as well. Okay, so let's talk about the matchups, guys. We're going to cover 3 matchups in this deck, or versus this deck. Number 1 is going to be 3 Musketeer decks. Number 2 is going to be Hog decks, Hog P.E.K.K.A decks, which are definitely taking a rise in the meta right now. And number 3 is going to be a mirror match, because this deck, as we saw in the beginning of the video, has a lot of people using it right now. So how do you handle a mirror match? Let's start with 3 Musketeers. So it all comes down to one interaction against the 3 Musketeer Miner deck. You know the 3 Musketeer Miner deck, right? It's 3 Musketeers, Miner, Minion Horde, Pump. Those are like the crux of the deck, the foundation of the deck, and they build around that. It's a very, very difficult deck to combat, no matter what deck you're using. As a matter of fact, that's the deck that I've had the most success with so far, going 17-0 this morning in the Champion Challenge, which is, you know, almost done now. By the time this video goes out, you're not going to have a lot of time left. So good luck to all of you guys if you haven't got the 20 wins yet. Remember, at the very end of the challenge, it gets a little bit easier because all the good players have hopefully already won those 20 wins. But anyway, the 3 Musketeer Miner deck was the deck that I had the most success with. I went 17-0 and then 0-3. It feels bad, man. It feels bad. So anyway, what Adam says to do is it's one interaction that you have to pay special attention to, and we alluded to this earlier, little foreshadowing in that the princess is your most valuable card, MVP for sure, most valuable princess in this deck. Forgive the cheesiness, guys. So what you want to do, how do you protect the princess? What you want to do is when you play the princess in front of your king tower, your opponent is going to want to attack her immediately using their miner. That way the princess can't get any value against that minion horde or even 3 Musketeers. Princess from afar does very well against 3 Musketeers, kind of softening them up. So you can use your log later on or a goblin gang to finish them off. So what you want to do is always be ready against that miner. And Adam says whenever he plays his princess against the 3 Musketeer player with the miner, he's always going to have his knight and his ice spirit, especially the knight, right? The knight and the ice spirit ready to defend that princess. It's really important. You know, if you're a beatdown player, a 3 Musketeer player, or any player who's using a pump in your deck, and you're not afraid to devote a lot of elixir to defending that pump, right? I mean, that's all about what the early game is when you're playing an elixir pump. You want to think of the princess the same way. Don't be afraid to defend the princess, even if it means using 4 elixir, your knight and your ice spirit, to defend against your opponent's miner with her. So defend your princess, because a princess against that 3 Musketeer deck provides insane value, according to Adam. How about Hog decks? Well, number 1 is don't use your Inferno Tower too much. That's a surprise for me, because me being the noob that I am, I think, hey, Inferno Tower, I have it in my deck. It's for situations like that. A hog coming at me, if I have Inferno Tower ready, I'm going to go ahead and use it. That's a big mistake, according to Adam. Adam says you want to try not to use your Inferno Tower if at all possible, and it's really obvious. It's a -1 trade against a solo Hog Rider, and even if it's like a Hog Rider Ice Spirit, Hog Rider Skeletons, or Hog Rider Ice Golem coming at you, it's just not the ideal defense. If a naked Hog Rider comes at you in a lane, you're much better off defending with Goblin Gang and an Ice Spirit. Goblin Gang and Ice Spirit will answer the Hog for an even trade. The Hog won't get a hit on your tower, and the opponent will have to answer against your Goblin Gang. What if your opponent uses a log against your Goblin Gang? Well, heck, this is a spell bait deck, so that works out even better. If the log is out of hand, you can go super aggressive with that Goblin Barrel, with that Princess at the bridge, whatever you need to do to get that chip damage on the other end. Now, of course, sometimes you're going to have to use the Inferno Tower against that Hog, just as you would against a Golem or a Giant. That's what the Inferno Tower is really there for, or a Lava Hound in this deck normally. But your first option should always be, how can I defend against this Hog without having to use my Inferno Tower? Other than that, don't be afraid to chip with the Princess at the bridge against Hog Decks. That's what you're going to do. That's what Adam's going to do more often than not. He's going to get a lot of chip damage and then finish off the opponent with a rocket or a rocket cycle when we're getting down to the last 30 minutes. Whoa, that'd be a long match there, Ash. 30 seconds of the match. What about the last matchup that we have to talk about? It's the mirror matchup. Again, this deck is so popular that we have to decide what the best way to counter our own deck is playing this deck. So what you want to do is keep your Princess alive. Again, it all comes back to the Princess, and this also applies to the Dark Goblin in a lot of ways. You want to keep your big ranged air targeting troop alive if you're playing the free-to-play version, right? So make sure you keep Princess alive if at all possible, especially against bait decks, guys. Princess provides so much value, so be sure to keep her alive, protect her with everything that you've got. Other than that, keep track of their cycle, keep track of your cycle versus their cycle. If it's a bait versus bait player, whoever does the better job at keeping an awareness of their opponent's cycle and when they have their good counters in hand usually will win the match. So make sure cognitively when you go into a match, you're prepared and you know what you're up against. If you feel like you're up on Elixir and or have more troops on the arena, don't be afraid to end with a rocket cycle against your opponent. And there we go, guys. I hope this video, and I feel pretty confident, I think this is a good one. I don't know, I hope you guys agree, right? But I was so happy to provide to you guys Adam's tip. You know what I will do is I'll include a list of all the tips that I've been reading off the screen in the description below if you prefer the written version. I want to give a huge shout out to Adam for coming on the channel, and he wants to give a huge shout out to AY. Of course, we all know AY. He is the leader of Nova, a really great guy. So thank you for everything that you do for the community to AY. From Adam and yours truly. And speaking of thank yous to great guys, huge thank you to Brendan Chong for everything that you do for me and the community. Make sure you check him out, guys, in the description below. Guys, thank you so much for watching. It truly means the world to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, take care, guys.